On a freezing night in 1990, a young highway patrol officer made a routine call. She had just pulled over a speeding car. Her voice on the radio was steady, calm. Minutes later, silence, no response, no backup call, nothing. When officers rushed to her last known location, her cruiser was gone. She was gone. It was like the highway had swallowed her whole. For 15 years, her family searched every road, every field, every river. No answers, no closure. And then out of nowhere, a local diver spotted something strange at the bottom of a dark reservoir. At first he thought it was scrap metal, but when he brushed away the mud his heart nearly stopped. A police cruiser, half buried, forgotten by time. Inside was the chilling truth about what really happened to her that night. Or was it? Because even today, decades later, there are people who say the real story is still being hidden. So what really happened to the officer who vanished into the dark? If you love true crime mysteries told in a cinematic way, hit subscribe and turn on the bell, because this story is about to get very dark. And tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from right now? She wasn't supposed to be a police officer. At least that's what her family thought. Growing up, she was shy but strong-willed. In high school, while most of her friends dreamed about leaving town, she talked about serving people. She wanted to wear a uniform to protect others. Her parents were proud but scared. They worried the job was too dangerous, especially for their daughter. But she didn't listen. She studied hard, trained even harder, and earned her badge at just 23 years old. Colleagues said she stood out, not because she was loud or tough, but because she cared. She remembered birthdays. She wrote thank you notes. She treated strangers with respect. Other officers trusted her, even though she was young. Off duty, she was just a small-town girl. She laughed with her sisters, went fishing with her dad, and called her mom every single day. But once she put on the uniform, she was all business. Her dream was simple: help people and come home safe each night. And for a while, that's exactly what she did. But in 1990, during one quiet night shift, that dream and her life took a turn no one could have imagined. The highways she patrolled were long, flat, and empty. During the day, cars passed through constantly, but at night, it was different. Hours could go by without a single pair of headlights. She often joked with other officers that the silence was the hardest part. You sat in your cruiser, engine humming, radio crackling now and then, waiting for something to happen. But silence didn't mean safety. In fact, nights were the most dangerous. Drunk drivers sped down the roads, trucks drifted over the center lines, and sometimes criminals used the empty highways to move without being noticed. She knew this. That's why she stayed alert. Every stoplight glow, every sound in the dark put her on edge. Other officers admitted they hated working that stretch of road. It was too quiet, too empty, a bad place to be alone. Still, she never complained. She told her family she felt safer helping late at night, because fewer people were around to get hurt if something went wrong. But the reality was simple. When you were alone on those highways, there was no backup right away. If trouble found you, you were on your own until help could arrive. That was the risk she faced every shift. And on her final night, that risk became real. On the evening of her last shift, everything seemed normal. She arrived at the station, signed in, and joined the other officers for roll call. The sergeant read off assignments, checked equipment, and gave updates on traffic concerns. Nothing unusual, just the same routine as always. She sat quietly, nodding along, taking notes. She didn't stand out. No one knew this would be the last time they'd see her. After roll call, she walked to her cruiser. The night air was cool, the sun already gone. She checked her gear, adjusted her radio, and then called in to dispatch. Her voice was calm and steady, the way it always was. Unit 47, starting shift. The dispatcher answered back. Everything was set. She pulled out of the station lot and onto the highway. For her, it was just another shift. Another long night of watching for speeding cars, checking on stranded drivers, and waiting for calls. But in just a few hours, that calm voice on the radio would go silent forever. And when dispatch tried to reach her again, she wouldn't answer. No one knew it yet, but her last roll call had just ended. Around midnight, her shift seemed like any other. She drove the empty highway, headlights cutting through the dark. Then, in the distance, she spotted a car moving too fast. Her radar lit up. The driver was speeding well above the limit. She reached for the radio and calmly called it in. Unit 47, vehicle speeding northbound, initiating stop. Her voice was steady, professional. Dispatch logged it without concern. This was routine. She had pulled over dozens of cars before. She flicked on her lights, and the red and blues reflected across the highway. The car slowed down and pulled onto the shoulder. She positioned her cruiser carefully the way she was trained. Lights on, radio ready. She stepped out. What she saw in the car is unknown. No one knows what words were exchanged or what expression was on her face. But what we do know is that, after this moment, she was never heard from again. To dispatch, it was just another traffic stop. To her, it might have felt the same. But this was no ordinary stop. This was the moment the mystery began. Minutes passed. Dispatch waited for her routine follow-up. Normally, after a stop, she would radio back with details. License plate, driver's info, status. But nothing came through. The dispatcher tried again. Unit 47, status check. Silence. They waited, tried again, still nothing. At first, it didn't feel urgent. Radios cut out sometimes. Maybe she was busy. Maybe she was writing a ticket. But as the minutes dragged on, concern grew. Another officer nearby was told to check her location. He drove fast, lights flashing, scanning the highway for her cruiser. But when he arrived, there was nothing. No patrol car, no stopped vehicle, just an empty stretch of road, dark and silent. The officer circled the area, checked the shoulders, the fields, even the ditches. Nothing. He called back to dispatch. "I don't see her." That's when panic began to spread. A uniformed officer had vanished. No car, no sign, just gone. And in that moment, the entire department realized something was very, very wrong. More officers rushed to the scene. Patrol cars lined the shoulder, their red and blue lights spinning across the empty fields. Engines rumbled. Radios buzzed. But the one thing everyone was looking for wasn't there. Her cruiser was gone. She was gone. And the car she had stopped was gone too. Officers spread out, shining flashlights into the ditches and tree lines. They expected to see skid marks, broken glass, tire tracks, something. But there was nothing. The road looked untouched, like no stop had ever happened. One officer walked the shoulder again and again, convinced he must be missing something. Another climbed down into a drainage ditch, mud soaking his boots, but it was empty. It was as if she had never been there. The air grew heavy. Radios crackled with nervous voices. A sergeant finally said what everyone was thinking. This doesn't make sense. They had dealt with car accidents, fights, even ambushes before. But this was different. A police officer in full uniform had called in a stop, and then vanished without a trace. By the end of that night, the highway was sealed off. Officers stood in silence, staring at the empty road, asking themselves the same question. Where did she go? At home, her family was already asleep. It was late, and they were used to her working nights. The phone ringing woke them up. Her mother answered, half awake. A voice on the other end said they needed to talk about her daughter. She had not checked in. Officers couldn't find her. At first, her mother didn't understand. "What do you mean you can't find her? She's a police officer. She has a radio. She has a car." But the truth began to sink in. Her father took the phone, trying to stay calm. The officer explained. Backup had arrived. The highway was searched. There was nothing. The house filled with panic. Her sisters cried, begging for answers. Her parents felt their worst fear becoming real. They had worried about the job for years. Every late shift, every call, they prayed she would come home safe. Now they were being told she was gone. Her father slammed the phone down and shouted that it had to be a mistake. But deep inside, they all knew this was not a mistake. Something terrible had happened, and their world would never be the same again. Within hours, the department launched a full search. Officers who had already worked long shifts refused to go home. They couldn't. One of their own was missing. Patrol cars lined up across the county, headlights cutting through the darkness as they moved in formation down the empty roads. Their spotlights swept over fields, fences, and ditches. Every shadow was checked. Every sound made hearts race. Helicopters circled above, shining powerful beams onto the ground. From the air, they scanned rivers, barns, and lonely dirt roads. Still, there was nothing. Officers knocked on farmhouse doors in the middle of the night, asking if anyone had seen flashing lights or heard anything unusual. Most people hadn't. A few claimed they noticed something near the reservoir, but no one was sure. The search spread wider. Backroads were combed, bridges checked, creeks searched. Dogs were brought in, straining at their leashes, but the trail went cold almost immediately. As dawn approached, the highway looked like a war zone. Dozens of cruisers parked along the shoulder, their lights still flashing. Exhausted officers leaned against their cars, shaking their heads in disbelief. She had vanished, her car had vanished, it didn't feel real. And the longer the search went on without answers, the more terrifying the silence became. Dispatch tried again. Unit 47, status check. No reply. They waited a minute, then tried once more. Still nothing. At first, the dispatcher thought it might be a radio problem, but as 5 to 10 minutes went by, that thought disappeared. She had never gone silent before. Not once. The dispatcher's voice grew sharper. All units attempt contact with 47. Radios across the county lit up. Officers called her by name, hoping she'd answer. Nothing came back. That's when backup officers hit the highway. Sirens blared. Engines roared. Every second felt heavier than the last. One officer later said the drive was the longest of his life. He pushed his cruiser as fast as it would go, staring at the dark road ahead, praying he'd see her lights. Another officer joined from the opposite side of the county. He said he had a sick feeling in his stomach the entire way. By now, dispatch wasn't treating it as routine. This was an emergency. Finally, the first backup car reached her location, but what he saw made his heart stop. The road was empty. No cruiser, no officer, no car she had pulled over. Just black asphalt stretching into the night. The first officer out of his car shined his flashlight across the highway. Nothing. Not a skid mark. Not a broken piece of glass. It was like no traffic stop had ever happened. More units arrived, lining the shoulder with flashing red and blues. They spread out, searching the ditches and tree lines. Radios cracked with tension. Negative here. Clear on this side. One officer climbed down into a drainage ditch, splashing through muddy water. Another walked through tall grass, sweeping his light across every shadow. Both came up empty. They checked under bridges, in abandoned barns, and down service roads. Still nothing. What made it worse was the silence. Usually there were signs, a tire mark, a dropped radio, something. But this time there was zero trace. The officers gathered at the shoulder, frustrated and confused. One said quietly, "It's like she just disappeared." That single sentence spread like wildfire. A police officer had called in a traffic stop, and then she and her cruiser had been erased from the world. The search had officially begun, but it was already starting with nothing. Within an hour, the search expanded. Helicopters were scrambled and lifted into the night sky. Their blades thundered as they circled above the highways and fields. Spotlights cut across the ground, sweeping through trees, rivers, and open farmland. From the air, the pilots reported back. No cruiser, no sign of movement. On the ground, the scene looked like a manhunt. Dozens of patrol cars parked shoulder to shoulder, lights spinning red and blue against the black night. Officers stood with flashlights, scanning every inch of dirt and asphalt. Neighbors along the highway woke up to pounding knocks at their doors. Officers asked the same question again and again. Did you see anything? Did you hear sirens? Did you notice lights? Most hadn't. A few said they thought they saw something near the reservoir, but no one was certain. Still, nothing solid turned up. No skid marks, no broken glass, no cruiser. One officer later said it was the strangest search of his career. "It looked like we were hunting for a ghost," he recalled. The helicopters kept circling, but the truth was undeniable. There was nothing to find. She was gone. With nothing on the highway, the search moved deeper. Officers branched off into the county's maze of dirt roads and farm paths. One by one, they drove slowly down gravel lanes, high beams on, sweeping through the dark fields. Engines growled. Dust rose behind their tires. Every shadow seemed suspicious. Officers stopped to check ditches and fences. Some got out and walked with flashlights, calling her name, waiting for any sound to answer back. But the fields gave nothing but silence. A deputy found fresh tire tracks in soft dirt and thought, for a moment, it was the break they needed. But when he followed them, they led only to a tractor sitting behind a barn. Another team checked old farm paths where kids sometimes dumped stolen cars. Still, nothing. By dawn, the officers were covered in mud, exhausted and frustrated. They had combed back roads, bridges, even abandoned sheds. Not a shred of evidence. It was becoming more than a search. It was a nightmare. Because if a police officer with a cruiser and a radio could vanish without leaving a single trace, what chance did anyone else have? By sunrise, a new lead spread through the search teams. Several locals swore they had seen flashing lights near the reservoir late that night. Some said it looked like a patrol car parked at the water's edge. The tip was taken seriously. If true, it meant her cruiser might be underwater. Police called in divers. Boats launched onto the reservoir, engines buzzing as the morning fog lifted. Officers lined the banks, watching closely. One diver slipped beneath the surface, then another. They worked in pairs, moving carefully through the cold, murky water. Visibility was almost zero. They could barely see their hands in front of their faces. Every so often, a diver surfaced, shaking his head. Nothing. They tried again and again, shifting to different sections of the reservoir. Still nothing. Hours passed. The sun climbed high. Families gathered on the shore, watching in silence. Some prayed. Others held signs with her name, begging for answers. Finally, the divers called it. No car, no officer, no trace. The rumor had given hope, but once again hope was crushed. The mystery was growing darker, and now fear spread beyond the police force, because if she was gone here, she could be gone anywhere. Within days, the family was thrust into the public eye. The police organized a press conference, setting up microphones and cameras outside the station. Her parents stood together, holding a framed picture of her in uniform. Her sisters stood close, tears already rolling down their cheeks. The crowd of reporters went silent as her father stepped forward. His voice cracked. "We just want our daughter home. Please, if anyone knows anything, come forward." Her mother could barely speak. She gripped the photo tight, her lips trembling. She loved her job. She loved helping people. "We just want answers. We just want her back." TV stations aired the plea across the state. Clips of her smiling in uniform played over news anchors explaining the mystery. The family's faces became familiar to millions. Neighbors left candles on their porches. Churches held vigils. Kids drew signs that read, "Find our officer," and taped them to windows. But behind the cameras, exhaustion was clear. Her father's eyes were bloodshot from nights without sleep. Her mother had stopped eating. Her sisters kept replaying the last time they saw her, wondering if they had missed a sign. They had never imagined their lives would be reduced to begging strangers for clues. But now all they could do was hope someone, somewhere, knew the truth. The first week brought nonstop coverage. Helicopters, news trucks, headlines screaming, "Officer missing, cruiser gone." But by the second week, reality sank in. The search was no longer breaking news. It was routine. Officers kept combing rivers, fields, and back roads, but each new lead collapsed. A reported sighting at a gas station turned out to be a woman in a similar jacket. A tip about a car in the woods was just an abandoned pickup. Every time, hope rose, then crashed. At the station, detectives built boards full of maps and photos. Lines of string connected rumors to locations, but none of it led anywhere. The family still appeared at every press briefing, but they looked worn down. Her father's words grew shorter. Her mother's voice grew softer. They were being crushed by the silence. And the public, once shocked, began to drift. Other news took over. The crowds at vigils shrank. Weeks passed, and still there was no trace of her or her cruiser. For the officers who loved her, and for the family who needed her, the hardest part wasn't just the search. It was realizing that hope itself was starting to fade. As the weeks dragged on with no answers, fear began to settle over the town like a heavy fog. At first, people whispered quietly in diners and grocery stores. But soon, the whispers grew louder. If a trained officer, in full uniform with a radio and a cruiser, could vanish without a trace. What chance did anyone else have? Parents started locking doors earlier. Some stopped letting their kids walk to school. Women refused to drive alone at night. Gas stations reported customers pulling in pairs. Nobody wanted to be isolated on the highways after dark. One man said he kept a shotgun by his front door for the first time in 20 years. A mother admitted she hadn't slept since the officer disappeared, convinced someone was out there waiting. Rumors spread fast. Some said there was a gang targeting police. Others claimed a serial predator was stalking the highways. None of it was proven, but fear didn't need proof. It just needed silence. The highways she once patrolled, meant to protect people, now felt cursed. Every flashing light in the distance made drivers tense up. Every routine traffic stop sparked anxiety. It wasn't just a missing officer anymore. It was the haunting thought that safety itself had vanished with her. By the third month, investigators faced a grim truth. They had nothing. No body, no car, no weapon, no witnesses they could fully trust. Every lead they followed collapsed. Each search ended empty. Reports piled up, but none held answers. For a missing officer, the silence was crushing. At press briefings, detectives admitted they were stalled. They couldn't say if she was alive or dead, if she was kidnapped, or if she drove away on her own. Everything was possible, and that was the problem. Without hard evidence, speculation began to take over. Inside the station, theories bounced around between detectives. Some swore it was an ambush. Others whispered about betrayal. A few even wondered if she had secrets no one knew. The public was no different. In town squares, at church services, and in grocery lines, people debated the case as if they were part of the investigation. Everyone had a theory. The longer the silence lasted, the stranger the theories became. And with no proof to shut them down, rumors spread faster than facts. For her family, it was torture. They wanted answers, but all they got were questions, and worse, doubts. The case wasn't just cold, it was poisoned. The first major theory was simple: revenge. She had arrested many dangerous people over the years: drug dealers, thieves, violent criminals. Some were locked away. Others had been released back into the community. What if one of them waited for her? Detectives knew the possibility was real. Officers whispered about it in private, too. A trap could have been set on the highway, a staged traffic stop, a car slowing down to lure her in. The idea spread quickly. Locals imagined shadowy figures hiding on back roads, ready to strike. Families asked if police could still protect anyone. Even other officers grew cautious on patrol, scanning every car twice before making a stop. The theory gained strength because it made sense. She was targeted for the badge she wore. But there was no proof. No suspicious cars caught on camera. No reliable witnesses. No notes, no messages, no claims of responsibility. Still, the theory stuck. It was dark, it was frightening, and it explained what nothing else could. But it wasn't the only rumor that took hold. The second major theory was crueler. Some whispered she had staged her own disappearance. People said maybe she was tired of the job, tired of the danger, tired of the long nights on lonely highways. Others went further, claiming she wanted to escape her whole life. These rumors hurt the family the most. Her sisters called it nonsense. Her parents broke down when asked about it on TV. They said she loved her career, loved her family, and would never abandon them. Detectives also found no proof she planned to leave. Her bank account was untouched. Her apartment was neat. Nothing was missing. She had even bought groceries the night before she vanished. But rumors don't need evidence to survive. At bars and diners, people leaned close and whispered, maybe she wanted out. It was easier for some to believe she walked away than to face the scarier truth, that someone out there had the power to make her disappear. For her loved ones, the runaway rumor was a second tragedy. She was already gone, and now her character was disappearing too. As weeks turned into months, tension between investigators and the family grew sharper. Detectives, under pressure, began pushing theories that felt cruel. In meetings and briefings, they suggested the runaway idea again, saying maybe she had left by choice. They also circled back to the possibility she had been involved with someone secretly, or had debts no one knew about. Her family was furious. Her father slammed his fist on a table during one heated meeting. "You think my daughter just walked away? You didn't know her. We did." Her mother broke down, sobbing that their daughter would never abandon her family, her duty, or her community. The detectives insisted they were only exploring every possibility, but to the family, it felt like betrayal. Instead of finding the truth, the investigation was painting her as someone she was. Reporters caught wind of the tension. Headlines appeared, "Family at odds with investigators." It made the family feel even more isolated. They had already lost their daughter. Now it felt like they were losing the fight to protect her memory. The case wasn't just cold. It was tearing apart the very people who wanted answers the most. Just as the investigation stalled, a new voice entered the chaos, a local psychic. She claimed to have seen the missing officer in a vision. According to her, the officer was beneath the water. She refused to say which body of water, only that she felt darkness and cold. Police dismissed the claim immediately. Detectives called it a distraction and told reporters they wouldn't waste resources chasing superstition. But the community was desperate. People listened. Some even begged investigators to search lakes and rivers again. The psychic appeared on local radio, repeating her warning. Soon, flyers and posters carried the words, "Beneath the water." For the family, it was heartbreaking. They didn't believe in psychics, but hearing their daughter's name tied to visions of drowning was almost unbearable. Still, they couldn't stop people from talking. Divers were quietly sent to check nearby ponds and streams, mostly to calm the public. Each search came back empty. The psychic faded from the headlines after a few weeks, but her words left a chilling echo that never fully went away. The idea of water, dark, deep, and silent, would haunt the case for years to come. As months dragged on, tips began pouring into the department. People from across the state claimed they had seen her. One caller swore she was at a truck stop 2 hours away. Another said she overheard men bragging in a bar about getting rid of a cop. Detectives chased them all. They drove hundreds of miles, questioned strangers, and checked security tapes. Every time, it ended the same way: nothing. Some tips were strange. A woman insisted she had seen the missing officer walking barefoot along a country road at sunrise. A man mailed in a hand-drawn map, claiming it marked the burial site. When police followed it, they found nothing but trees. Each false lead wasted hours, sometimes days. Detectives grew exhausted, frustrated, and bitter, but they couldn't ignore the calls. What if one tip was real? For the family, the constant rumors were torture. Each new tip raised hope, only for it to collapse again. Every phone call felt like a cruel game, lifting their hearts, then breaking them. By the end of the year, hundreds of tips had been logged. Not one brought them closer. The search wasn't dead, but it was lost. As if losing her wasn't enough, the family soon faced something they never expected: suspicion. Neighbors began whispering. Some pitied them, saying they must be living through hell. Others weren't so kind. They suggested the family was hiding something. In small towns, rumors spread quickly. At church, people avoided sitting too close. At the grocery store, conversations stopped when her parents walked down the aisle. Children at school repeated things they overheard from adults, asking her nieces and nephews if their aunt had run away on purpose. The family felt surrounded. They were grieving, but also defending themselves against shadows. One night, reporters camped outside their home, asking if they believed she had secret problems or a hidden life. Her mother slammed the door, crying. Her father cursed at the cameras. Inside, the family clung to each other. They knew the truth. She would never abandon them. But the lack of answers left a void that rumors filled. They were victims, yet somehow they had become suspects in the eyes of their own community. The disappearance had stolen their daughter. Now it was stealing their peace too. For her family, the years did not heal. Every holiday reminded them of what was missing. On birthdays, they baked a cake with her name on it. The candles flickered, but she wasn't there to blow them out. On Thanksgiving, one chair at the table stayed empty, a silent reminder of the daughter who never came home. At Christmas, her stocking still hung by the fireplace. The silence was the hardest part. Other families laughed, traded stories, and shared gifts. Her family tried, but everything felt heavy. The missing space at the table was louder than any words. Her mother would sometimes set out her favorite meal, hopping it might feel like she was close. Her father sat quietly, staring at the chair, refusing to let anyone move it. For them, that chair was a promise. Until they had answers, she would always have a place in their home. Every holiday photo showed it, the empty seat that no one dared to fill. 15 years passed this way, each celebration repeating the same pattern. Life moved forward, but inside the family home, time stood still. The missing officer wasn't just gone. She was painfully present in every silence. Her fellow officers never forgot either. Every year they returned to the lonely stretch of highway where her last call came in. At the mile marker where her radio went silent, flowers appeared. At first, it was just once or twice a year. Then it became a ritual. Fresh bouquets, sometimes with handwritten notes, were left on the roadside. Rain, wind, and snow often ruined them within hours, but that didn't matter. The act was what counted. Some officers stopped on their way home from night shifts, stepping out of their cruisers to lay a single rose. Others came in groups, standing in silence as trucks roared past. New recruits were told the story during training. Many of them never knew her, but they joined the ritual anyway. It became part of the department's culture, a reminder of both danger and loyalty. Drivers noticed the flowers too. Some slowed down when they passed, whispering to themselves, remembering. For many in town, that stretch of road was no longer just pavement. It was a memorial. The flowers faded, but the tradition did not. For 15 years, the highway told its own story. They hadn't forgotten, and they never would. 15 years is a long time. Shops closed, new ones opened. Children grew up, families moved away, and life changed. But in this town, the officer's disappearance was never fully buried. At barber shops and diners, people still whispered about it. Newcomers heard the story within weeks of arriving. They were told not just about the missing officer, but about the unanswered questions. The empty highway, the vanished cruiser, the silence on the radio. Some locals avoided talking about it, saying it was too painful. Others brought it up often, using it as a warning about the dangers of the road. Her picture stayed on the bulletin board at the police station. A framed photo also hung at the town library. Even school kids who weren't born when she vanished recognized her face. Life moved forward, but the mystery stayed. It was like a shadow over the town, always there even as the years piled on. The officer was gone, but she was not forgotten. Her absence became part of the community itself, something nobody could fully explain and nobody could ever erase. As the years stretched on, the case began to shift from tragedy to legend. Teenagers in town turned it into a ghost story. On late nights, groups of kids dared each other to drive down the same highway where she vanished. They whispered that if you slowed near the mile marker, you could still hear her last radio call echo through the static. Some swore they saw flashing red and blue lights by the reservoir, even when no police cars were there. Others claimed they saw a woman in uniform standing by the guardrail, only for her to disappear when headlights hit her. Parents hated the stories, but they couldn't stop them. For a new generation, the officer wasn't just a missing person. She was part of the town's folklore. At bonfires, kids told the story as if it were a ghost tale. A cop vanished right here, they'd say, pointing toward the dark reservoir. Her car is still at the bottom. The truth was far worse than a ghost story. She was a real person, with a real family still waiting for her. But time had blurred the line between memory and myth. Her case wasn't just cold, it was becoming a legend. By the early 2000s, police finally had tools they didn't have in 1990. Sonar scanning equipment was now more advanced. Crews could map the bottoms of lakes and rivers in ways that were impossible before. Detectives decided it was time to try again. Special teams went out with boats, slowly dragging sonar arrays across dark waters. Strange shapes appeared on the screens, and each one was checked. Divers suited up, slipping beneath the surface, searching for wrecks or debris that might match a police cruiser. For weeks, crews searched lakes, rivers, and the reservoir itself. Each time, hopes rose. Each time, they came up empty. The water gave nothing back. To the family, it was torture all over again. 15 years later and still no answers. Detectives closed their notebooks, frustrated. Technology had moved forward, but the case had not. The mystery was still locked away, waiting for someone to break it open. As the years dragged on, her family carried their grief like a heavy shadow. Her parents aged quickly. Every wrinkle seemed carved by worry. Her mother's hair turned gray, and her father's shoulders slumped from years of sleepless nights. They never stopped waiting for the phone to ring, but each call that came was never the one they wanted. Her siblings grew into adulthood with a constant ache. Birthdays, graduations, weddings, every milestone felt incomplete. She should have been there, but she was. They often felt guilty for moving forward while she was still missing. Family photos told the story. In every picture, smiles looked thinner. There was always a space where she should have been standing. Hope and loss pulled them in opposite directions. Some days they felt strong, certain she was alive. Other days, the weight of silence crushed them. For 15 years, her family lived in limbo. Not knowing the truth was the hardest part. It was like being trapped between two worlds, one where she was gone, and one where she was still out there, waiting to be found. At the police department, her case slowly became just another file. In the beginning, the binder was thin, just a few reports, photographs, and statements. But as years passed, the file grew thicker. Each new lead, each false sighting, each tip that went nowhere was added to the pile. By year 15, the box holding her case was stuffed. Inside were maps covered in red marks, lists of suspects long cleared, transcripts of interviews, and grainy photos of the stretch of highway where she disappeared. The box sat on a shelf in the records room, alongside dozens of other cold cases. Officers passed it daily, glancing at the name written in bold across the spine. Most still remembered the night she vanished. Some were new and only knew the legend. But the file told a painful truth. Despite endless work, they were no closer to solving it. Detectives sometimes pulled it out, flipping through the pages, hoping something new might stand out. Each time they came to the same ending: silence. The case box collected dust, just like the unanswered questions it held. It was a story frozen in time, waiting for something, anything, to break it open. 15 years. That was how long it had been since she vanished. For her family, the anniversary wasn't a day of remembrance. It was a wound reopening. Each year felt heavier, but 15 was different. It was a number too large to ignore. Her parents still kept her picture on the mantel, candles lit beside it, but their words had changed. Instead of "when she comes home," they now said "if." Even saying that broke their hearts. Her siblings, now grown, were split. Some still clung to hope, refusing to believe she was gone. Others quietly admitted what they never wanted to say out loud, that she might never be found, that maybe the truth had been swallowed by time. The community held a small memorial. People gathered with candles, praying, but the crowd was smaller than it used to be. Some neighbors had moved away, some had passed on, and new families in town only knew her story as an old mystery. For the first time, her family felt the edges of hope slipping away. They wanted to believe she was still alive, but the silence of 15 years was deafening. It felt like the world had let her disappear forever. In the summer of 2005, a local diver went into the reservoir for what should have been a simple training dive. He wasn't looking for anything special, just practicing. The water was calm on the surface, but underneath, it was different. The deeper he went, the darker it became. The light from above faded fast. Visibility was poor. The water was filled with floating silt, making it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. His flashlight cut through the black water like a thin blade, but even then everything looked cloudy. He swam slowly, controlling his breathing, checking his gauges. He had been here before and knew the reservoir sometimes held strange junk: old tires, beer cans, fishing gear, even the remains of small boats. None of it surprised him anymore. But this time he felt something different. The water felt heavy. The silence pressed against him. He scanned the bottom, looking for anything to practice clearing. Rocks, tree branches, scraps of metal, it all blended together. And then, in the middle of the murky darkness, something caught his eye. It was faint, just the smallest reflection of light, something metallic, hidden under the layers of mud at the bottom of the reservoir. At first, the diver thought it was nothing, maybe just a broken pipe or a piece of scrap metal. Junk like that wasn't unusual down here. He swam closer, aiming his flashlight at the object. It was partly buried under thick silt. Years of mud and algae had covered most of it. Only a small section stuck out, just enough to reflect his light. He reached down and brushed at the surface with his glove. The mud clouded up instantly, blinding him. He waved his hand to clear it, then tried again. The more he uncovered, the stranger it looked. This wasn't just a random piece of metal. The surface was smooth, shaped, almost too perfect. He uncovered more, running his hand along the edge. Something about the size and structure didn't fit with junk. This was big, bigger than a boat motor, bigger than any scrap he had ever found before. His heart began to pound. Divers sometimes trained with wrecks, but this didn't feel like a practice site. This felt real. Whatever this was, it had been down here for years. The diver cleared more silt away, working slowly. As the mud drifted off, he froze. What came into view wasn't random scrap. It was the outline of something massive, something unmistakable. He brushed away another section and the shape grew clearer, a car door. Then another, the roof, the trunk. It wasn't just any car, it was a four-door sedan. Moving along the side, he spotted something else, metal bars inside the rear windows. A divider cage. Police cars used those. He swam toward the front, and his light caught on something that made his stomach drop. Sitting on the roof, coated in years of algae and grime, was a police light bar. The colors were long gone, buried under green growth, but the shape was clear. This wasn't a random car. This was a police cruiser, and everyone in town knew there was only one police cruiser that had gone missing in this reservoir's shadow. The diver surfaced fast. He knew exactly what he had just found. The diver shot to the surface, gasping for air. His hands shook as he pulled off his mask. He didn't waste a second. He swam to the shore, climbed out, and grabbed his phone. His first call was to the local police department. His words came out fast, almost panicked. "There's a car down there. It looks like a police cruiser." Within the hour, the shoreline filled with flashing lights. Patrol cars lined the road near the reservoir. Officers walked quickly, speaking in low, tense voices. They had all heard the same rumor for years, that their missing officer might be in the water. Now, someone was saying it was real. Commanders ordered the area sealed off. Boats were launched. Divers suited up. The scene transformed from a quiet training dive into a major recovery operation. Heavy equipment was brought in, including cranes and tow rigs strong enough to pull a car from the depths. Reporters showed up too, their cameras already rolling. Word was spreading fast. The officers on the shore were silent, almost pale. Many of them had known her. For 15 years they had wondered where she had gone. Now the answer might be waiting at the bottom of this reservoir. By the time the recovery began, a large crowd had gathered at the shoreline. Families stood side by side. Retired officers came back to see it with their own eyes. Cameras zoomed in as divers attached cables to the sunken vehicle. The crane's engine roared, and slowly the line went taut. The water bubbled, then foamed. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, rising out of the reservoir, the shape of a car broke through the surface. It was soaked in mud, algae clinging to every inch. The light bar on top was still visible, though barely recognizable. The windows were blackened with silt. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some people cried. Others stood frozen, unable to believe what they were seeing. After 15 years of silence, the missing cruiser was back. But the real question was still inside. Once the cruiser was pulled onto dry land, investigators carefully opened the doors. The crowd fell silent, waiting for what would be revealed. Inside, the car was filled with mud, weeds, and the black silt of 15 years underwater. But under the debris, something unmistakable appeared. Bones. The skeletal remains were seated in the driver's seat, the frame of a seatbelt still wrapped across the chest. Nearby, tangled in the muck, were her belongings, a rusted badge, her duty belt, and pieces of her uniform. Officers turned away, some wiping their eyes. For them, this wasn't just evidence. It was their colleague, their friend, the young officer who had vanished without a trace. Crime scene photographers worked quickly, but no one spoke above a whisper. The air was heavy. 15 years of searching, of rumors, of questions, and now the truth was right here. She had never left the cruiser. She had been sitting in it the entire time, at the bottom of the reservoir. It was both heartbreaking and chilling. The mystery wasn't over, but the silence had finally been broken. News spread through town almost instantly. Phones rang. Radios interrupted broadcasts. By the evening, every television station was leading with the same headline: Missing Highway Patrol Officer Found After 15 Years. Her family was brought to the scene under police escort. When they saw the cruiser on the shoreline, draped in mud and algae, they broke down. Some cried loudly, others collapsed into the arms of officers. It was a mix of grief and relief. For so many years they had lived in the unknown. Now they had an answer. It was not the one they had prayed for, but it was something they could hold on to. Neighbors came to comfort them. Strangers left flowers near the site. Across the town, people whispered the same words: "She's been found." For the community, it felt like waking from a nightmare. For her family, it was the start of another kind of pain, burying her at last after 15 long years. The case was no longer about where she was. The question now was why. After the car was pulled from the reservoir, investigators moved it into a secure garage. They knew this vehicle was the key to understanding what had really happened that night. The cruiser was covered in layers of mud, algae, and rust. Step by step, specialists began washing away the years of buildup. Every inch of the car was photographed. Every dent, every crack, every piece of damage was logged. Onlookers had seen a car pulled from the water, but to the investigators, this wasn't just a car. It was a crime scene frozen in time. They checked the tires, noting their wear and position. They studied the windows, many of which were shattered. The driver's side still held fragments of glass in the frame. The front bumper was crushed inward, twisted metal suggesting a violent impact. Technicians removed the remains with care, sending them to a lab for official identification. Personal items, a flashlight, a notepad, a rusted radio, were also bagged as evidence. This wasn't a simple recovery. It was a chance to finally answer the question that had haunted everyone for 15 years: accident or foul play. The damage to the cruiser told a chilling story. Experts examined the front of the car first. The bumper and grille were smashed inward, as if the vehicle had slammed nose first into something solid. The hood was bent, the headlights shattered. To the experts it was clear: the cruiser had hit the water at high speed, diving straight down. They tested theories. Could she have been chasing a suspect? Did she swerve suddenly, or was she forced off the road? The windshield had spiderweb cracks, likely from the water pressure on impact. The roof showed little damage, suggesting the car didn't flip. It went straight down, nose first, until it buried itself in the muddy floor of the reservoir. The idea of her being trapped inside during such a plunge was horrifying. Investigators pictured those final seconds: water rushing in, pressure rising, and almost no chance of escape. This confirmed one thing: whatever happened, it wasn't slow. The car didn't drift into the water. It was pushed in at deadly speed. Inside the car, investigators searched for details that could reveal her last moments. They found the seatbelt still locked in place, wrapped across the driver's side. It hadn't been cut or removed. That suggested she had been wearing it when the car went under, and that she couldn't get it off in time. The steering wheel was bent slightly, as though gripped hard in a final struggle. The gear shift was stuck in drive. Broken glass lay across the floorboards, some shards pressed into the fabric of the seats. It looked like the windows had shattered as water forced its way in. The passenger side showed less damage, leading some to believe she had been alone, but questions remained. If it was an accident, why were there tire marks near the highway edge, as earlier searchers had reported? Did another car push her? Did she swerve to avoid something? The wreck gave painful clues but no full answers. Each piece of twisted metal whispered of. Old case files were pulled from storage, and one detail caught everyone's attention again. In the days after she vanished, officers had noticed faint tire marks on the highway near the reservoir. At the time, they were dismissed as normal traffic patterns. After all, hundreds of cars traveled that stretch daily. But now, with the cruiser found, those marks suddenly mattered. Were they hers? Or did they belong to another car? Photos from 1990 showed two sets of lines, one angling sharply toward the shoulder, the other continuing straight. It was impossible to tell with certainty after all these years, but investigators debated fiercely. If the angled marks were hers, it could mean she lost control at high speed. But if there was another car, maybe someone had been there with her that night. The road itself had been resurfaced long ago. The evidence, like so much else, was gone. With the cruiser back in sight, the debate turned heated. Some investigators believed it was simple. She had been chasing a speeding driver, lost control, and veered off into the reservoir. The high-speed plunge fit that scenario. Others weren't convinced. They argued that another vehicle may have been involved. Maybe someone swerved into her lane. Maybe she was rammed. Or maybe she had been ambushed by people who wanted her gone. The lack of skid marks suggested she didn't even have time to brake. That was chilling, because it meant the plunge might not have been her choice. The case had waited 15 years for answers, but even now, the truth stayed out of reach. When police suggested it might have been nothing more than an accident, her family couldn't accept it. They had lived with her every day. They knew her habits, her discipline, her careful nature. She was not reckless. She would not simply lose control. At press conferences, her mother shook her head in anger. Her father said flatly, "No, something else happened. Somebody put her there." Her siblings echoed the same belief, refusing to let her memory be reduced to what they saw as a lazy explanation. They demanded investigators dig deeper. If another car had been on the road, then someone out there still knew the truth. They wanted interviews reopened, suspects revisited, and every theory explored. To them, calling it an accident felt like closing the case too soon. After waiting 15 years, they couldn't accept an ending that simple. The officers listened, but frustration grew. Some detectives felt sympathy. Others thought the family was clinging to denial. But the message was clear. They weren't ready to bury her story under the label of just an accident. The biggest obstacle wasn't effort, it was time. 15 years underwater had stripped the cruiser of secrets. The once clear windshield was shattered. The seat fabric was rotted away. Evidence that might have shown a struggle, fingerprints, hair, even blood, was long gone. In 1990, fresh tire impressions could have been measured. Paint transfer might have revealed contact with another car. But by 2005, the road had been repaved, and the car itself was corroded beyond repair. Forensics experts explain that water eats away at clues faster than anyone realizes. Even bones, when submerged for years, lose vital details that might tell a cause of death. The family wanted answers. Investigators wanted answers. But the clock had worked against them. The case had aged into something no amount of technology could fully fix. And so, despite the shocking discovery of her cruiser, the core mystery remained frozen. They finally knew where she had ended up, but not how or why. The silence of 15 years had stolen the truth forever. After months of review, the investigators finally stood in front of the cameras. Reporters leaned forward, pens ready. The lead detective cleared his throat and gave the answer the public had waited 15 years for. Their official stance was simple. The officer had likely been chasing a speeding vehicle that night. During that pursuit, she lost control of her cruiser. The car veered off the highway, plunged nose first into the reservoir, and sank instantly. They called it a tragic accident. The explanation made sense on paper. The crushed front end matched the story of a high-speed impact. The lack of evidence of another vehicle left no clear suspect. And after so many years, there was no way to prove more than that. To investigators, the case was now solved. The mystery that had haunted the department was given an ending, sad but final. But as the words echoed out across the press room, many people felt uneasy. An accident was easy to explain, easy to file away, but it also left behind more questions than it answered. For the town, for the officers who once searched, and especially for her family, closure did not come. Her parents shook their heads when they heard the word accident. To them, it was impossible. Their daughter had been one of the most careful drivers in the family. She never sped. She never took risks. The idea that she lost control didn't fit. Her siblings agreed. They remembered her stories about criminals she had arrested, threats she had received, and the unease she sometimes confessed after late-night shifts. To them, the explanation felt like investigators taking the easy way out. At vigils, her family told reporters the same thing. She was forced off that road. Someone made this happen. Their words carried pain, but also defiance. After 15 years of waiting, they weren't willing to let her memory end with what they saw as a lazy conclusion. Behind closed doors, the family argued with detectives, begging them to reopen lines of inquiry. But with little evidence left, the investigators could only repeat their findings. For the family, that wasn't enough. To them, the fight for the truth wasn't over. It had simply entered a new phase, one where they carried the weight almost alone. Even as the case was officially closed, whispers continued to spread. Some locals swore it had been criminals she once arrested. Maybe they followed her that night, waited for her to be alone, and then forced her into the water. Others believed something darker, that another officer might have been involved, and the truth had been covered up. There were even wilder ideas. A few said she stumbled onto something bigger, something she wasn't supposed to see, and was silenced for it. The lack of evidence only fueled these theories. At coffee shops and barbershops and at family gatherings, the story never truly faded. Everyone had an opinion, and no two were the same. The reservoir became a symbol. Teenagers pointed to it and said, "That's where the mystery is." Adults shook their heads, saying, "We'll never know the truth." Her case lived on in rumor, speculation, and fear. It was a story that belonged not just to her family anymore, but to the entire community. The official word was accident, but unofficially, the mystery still breathed in every corner of town. Her disappearance left scars, not just in her family and town, but across law enforcement nationwide. Police departments studied what went wrong. For years, officers had searched fields, barns, and abandoned houses, but they hadn't thought to fully search the water right away. That mistake cost them 15 years. Training manuals began to change. Departments were told, if an officer goes missing near a highway, don't just look on land. Check rivers, lakes, and reservoirs immediately. Bring in sonar. Bring in divers. Don't wait. Special units were formed in some states, dedicated to underwater recovery. Technology advanced, with sonar scans becoming standard in missing person searches. When cruisers or cars vanished in later years, water was one of the first places checked. Her case became a lesson every new recruit heard in training. It showed how a single blind spot in an investigation could delay answers for over a decade. For officers who worked the streets, it also added a layer of caution. If one of their own could vanish in uniform, no one was untouchable. Her story wasn't just remembered, it reshaped how the country searched for its missing. After 15 long years, the day came. Her remains, recovered from the cruiser, were finally laid to rest. The funeral home was packed wall to wall. Officers from across the state lined the street in full uniform. Patrol cars with lights flashing stood bumper to bumper in a silent salute. Her coffin, draped in an American flag, moved slowly down the aisle. On top of it sat her folded uniform, the badge that had been pulled from the water, and the duty belt that once held her sidearm. The sight brought tears to nearly everyone there. Her family sat in the front row, holding each other as the service played out. It wasn't the ending they had prayed for, but it was the closest thing to closure they would ever get. When the final bell rang and the rifles fired in salute, the town seemed to exhale. After all the years of questions, searches, and rumors, they were finally saying goodbye. But even as the casket lowered, the mystery remained. The community honored her service, her courage, and her sacrifice, but the question of what truly happened on that highway never fully faded. When the funeral was over and the town went quiet, her family returned home. That's when the real grief hit. For years they had lived in limbo, caught between hope and despair. Now they finally had an answer, but it was not the one they wanted. In the living room, her mother stared at her folded flag, whispering that she should still be here. Her father sat in silence, gripping her badge so tightly his knuckles turned white. Her siblings looked through old photo albums, remembering the birthdays, holidays, and milestones she had missed. Relief that she was finally found clashed with anger at the mystery that still lingered. Was it really an accident, or had someone forced her off that road? Behind closed doors, the debate never ended. But one truth cut deepest. 15 years had been stolen from them. 15 years without answers. 15 years of waiting for a knock on the door that never came. Her family grieved the years they could never get back. Even with her buried, they were left holding both love and suspicion, knowing they might never learn what truly happened. Though the mystery was never solved, her story lived on. Police academies told new recruits about her case. Training programs taught officers to check every lake, river, and reservoir when someone went missing. Her disappearance reshaped how departments handled search operations. But beyond procedure, her name carried weight. She became a symbol of the risks every officer faces, the reality that danger could come at any moment, even on a routine patrol. Fellow officers spoke of her courage, reminding each other that she had given everything in service to her community. For the town, her memory became part of its identity. Each year, a memorial run was held in her honor. People lined the streets with candles, not to dwell on the tragedy, but to show she was never forgotten. Her story reached far beyond her hometown. Documentaries, articles, and true crime shows kept her case alive, and in every telling, one message stood out. She served bravely, and her sacrifice mattered. The truth of her final moments may never be known, but her legacy, her courage, her dedication, and the lessons learned from her disappearance lives on. She is remembered not just for how she was lost, but for how she lived.